This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boeing CEO apologizes again to Ethiopian and Lion Air plane crash victims' families. What does it mean for the families and airlines? South Africa's new cabinet to be sworn in after President Ramaphosa's surprise perfect gender balance. And Nigerian civil society groups demand more action to contain wave of kidnappings and killings. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme, Chinese telecom giant Huawei to continue to invest in 5G programme despite trade blacklist. And in sport, Chelsea thrash Arsenal 4-1 to lift the Europa League trophy in Baku. We begin the hour in the United States, where Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg has personally apologized to the families of victims from the Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines crashes. The aircraft manufacturer's anti-stall system on board the 737 MAX model has been implicated in both flights, in which 342 passengers in total and crew died. Muilenburg said that the implementation of the MCAS software was not done correctly, and airlines and pilots were not made fully aware of any problems until after the Lion Air crash in October last year. Well, let's hear more from his live interview with CBS Evening News.
I do personally apologize to the families. We feel terrible about these accidents, and we apologize for what happened. We are sorry for the loss of lives in both accidents. And that will never change. That will always be with us. I can tell you it affects me directly as a leader of this company. It's very difficult. There was inaccurate sensor data that came into the airplane that there appears to have been a maintenance issue with that sensor. We know that the MCAS software was activated multiple times during that flight, and in the end that added to the pilot workload. The implementation of that software, we did not do it correctly. Our engineers discovered that.
So you're fixing that now?
We're fixing it now, and our communication on that was not what it should have been. We clearly fell short, and the implementation of this angle of attack disagree alert was a mistake, right? We did not implement it properly. We're confident in the fundamental safety of the airplane.
Well, joining us now in the studio is Irungu Kangate. He is a member of Kenya's National Assembly and one of the lawyers for the families of the Kenyan victims of the Ethiopian Airlines Boeing crash. Thank you very much for joining us. We've just been listening to the apology by Mr. Muilenburg there, the Boeing CEO. How do you think the victims' families are going to react to that?
For me, that's positive from a moral point of view. But also from a legal point of view, for me, that is admission of liability. It makes our work easier in a court of law.
Okay, so you're satisfied with what he said there. You don't feel that he was being very careful with his language, legally speaking?
No, for me, that is an admission, and therefore, if we see once we go to a court of law, that will be sufficient for us to prove that indeed they are admitting liability.
Okay, let's talk about his admission to inaccurate sensor data on the airplane. Would you say that actually helps Boeing's defense, the airlines as well, and the victims' families?
Yes, the question should be who came up with that system. It is them, and therefore they are 100% culpable. So for me, that's not a good defense. It only adds to our case that indeed Boeing was responsible for what happened.
Okay, so you're very clear on that. What more do you think, though, that the victims' families would want to hear from Boeing after these latest comments? Do you find what he said is sufficient, or do you feel that the families do need to hear a bit more?
Of course, to a certain extent, would have wanted maybe a more express admission of liability. You can see he was more nuanced. He tended to choose his words more carefully. But be that as it may, for us, that may give us a better case and a stronger case when we are before the jury. And therefore, we see that the courts will give us what we call aggravated damages. For me, I wouldn't want that apology to be deemed as reducing culpability on the part of the Boeing. Saying sorry is not enough. Families lost their loved ones. So for me, the damages still should be punitive in nature.
Okay, and how much can you tell us about what the families are going to do next in terms of mounting this case of compensation?
Two things. Number one, we are busy collecting the victims who want to go to court. Currently, we have about 15 families which have expressed the intention of going to court.
15, it seems very small compared to how many families were affected by the
Yes, they are
number of
still
fatalities.
continuing. They are still continuing to come to us, and therefore we expect every family to join us. But as we speak now, I have seen expression of interest of about 15 families. But I have no doubt majority of them are going to join us, and we continue suing the company. After that, we shall prepare the requisite documents. We may start processes here in Kenya, but that not a must. Then immediately we shall lodge cases in court. In fact, as we speak, we have some matters that are already pending in court.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. That was Irungu Kangata, member of Kenya's National Assembly and one of the lawyers for the families of the Kenyan victims of the Ethiopian Airlines Boeing crash. Moving on to other news now. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has finally announced the composition of his cabinet. He revealed that the number of cabinet portfolios would be slimmed down from 36 to 28. Ramaphosa has reduced 14 ministries to 7. This is in line with his plans to reconfigure the state and to help revive the economy. CGTN's Yulissa Njamela has more.
Experience, continuity and gender mix. A lean, clean and effective cabinet. That is what President Cyril Ramaphosa's executive consists of. Ramaphosa's cabinet announcement follows weeks of speculation about who will be included and who will be left out from the previous cabinet. He also faced tough pressure to appoint a scandal-free cabinet, which does not include individuals who have been tainted by allegations of corruption.
In the election of the 8th of May, our people provided this administration with a clear mandate to accelerate inclusive economic growth, act with greater urgency to tackle poverty, improve government services, fight corruption, as well as to end state capture. If we are to give effect to this mandate, we need a capable, efficient and ethical government.
At his inauguration last Saturday, the president admitted that the journey ahead was not easy, and that he faces expectations for a cleanup of corruption which has engulfed a number of government departments and, crucially, state-owned enterprises. The president also faces the tough battle of dealing with socio-economic issues that have plagued the country, including rising unemployment and an underperforming economy.
All South Africans are acutely aware of the great economic difficulties that our country is going through right now. But they are also aware of the constraints that have been placed on our public finances. It is therefore imperative that in all areas and spheres of government, we place priority on revitalizing our economy, while at the same time exercising great care in the use of public funds.
To promote greater coherence, better coordination and improved efficiency, Ramaphosa says he has combined a number of portfolios, thereby reducing the number of ministers from 36 to 28.
If we are to make effective progress in building the South Africa that we all yearn for and the South Africa that we all want, it is important that we deploy into positions of responsibility people who are committed, people who are capable, hardworking, and who have integrity.
The president has previously asserted that his focus is to stabilize the country's economy, push for investment and growth, and set the country on a path towards more effective and cleaner governance. Ramaphosa emphasized that those who've been appointed must realize that expectations have never been higher and that they have huge responsibilities on their shoulders. He will be signing performance agreements with the deputy ministers and ministers, and those who are seen to be derelicting their functions and duties will likely be disciplined. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Well, let's get you more from Yolisa Njamela, who is in Pretoria for us. Yolisa, lots of surprises with President Ramaphosa's cabinet. Can you give us more details about the individuals included in the cabinet?
Well, Karen, the biggest surprise here in terms of the appointments is that of Patricia de Lille, the now Public Works Minister. She is no stranger to South Africans, having been the whistleblower with the controversial arms deal. But Patricia de Lille has in fact spent the last 2 years, the better part of the last 2 years, going in and out of the courts of law in this country, fighting with her now former party, the Democratic Alliance. She had served under the Democratic Alliance as the mayor of Cape Town. That is when they accused her of being involved in illegal and corrupt activities. She won that battle, and soon after she quit the DA and formed her own party known as the Good Party. Now, the Good Party only attained 2 seats in the National Assembly after the national general elections on May 8. Now, a lot of critics and political parties, political analysts and pundits saying that that is actually a good performance, considering that she formed the party a mere few months before the national general election. So and then there's that issue of Pravin Gordhan, the public enterprise minister, who's back in the fold. A lot of critics of Pravin Gordhan were saying he shouldn't be back because the watchdog in this country, the public protector, last week announced that she had made some adverse findings against Pravin Gordhan, and those had to do with the pension payout that he approved for former SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay. And the public protector was saying she found that to have been irregular. Now, Pravin Gordhan is of course taking that on review, but many other people are very happy with his appointment, in particular because over the past few years he has been stabilizing the often battered state-owned entities. And the last one on this one, Karen, is that of the finance ministry. Judging by the positive reaction of the markets, it would seem that the return of Tito Mboweni to the finance ministry has made a whole lot of people very happy, including South Africans. And what President Cyril Ramaphosa did with that portfolio is bring in young blood in the form of David Masondo to ensure continuity and inclusion of young people in this cabinet.
Let's talk a bit more about the 50-50 sharing of the cabinet slots between men and women. You already mentioned Patricia de Lille there. It came as a surprise to many, didn't it? What is the general reaction among the people on this development?
Well, it's not particularly a surprise, or at least I wouldn't call it that, Karen, because the governing ANC has a resolution that they have to have gender parity throughout governance. And where they failed, they would ensure that in provincial legislatures, there's gender parity. In positions that are high, they ensure that they put women leaders. For instance, Baleka Mbete has been the Speaker of Parliament for many years, and we've had even the Deputy President Party. The deputy president, woman deputy president in the form of Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka. What President Ramaphosa did, though, was achieve what they have been trying to do all these years. So it's always been what the African National Congress government has always wanted, to affirm women and ensure that women leaders are in proper position. And this time, it would seem that President Ramaphosa has actually at last attained that.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Yolisa and Jamela there for us in Pretoria on the new cabinet. Moving on to other news now. Nigeria, in addition to the Boko Haram insurgency, the country is battling to contain a spate of banditry and kidnappings. These armed attacks have led to the death of over 300 Nigerians in the first 3 months of this year alone. Several groups have now been staging protest rallies. They're urging the government to do more to protect citizens and to stop the killings. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
As President Buhari was taking the oath of office for his second term as president in faraway Abuja, hundreds of kilometers in Lagos, the civil society group was setting the security agenda for him.
Can no longer be business as usual. What are we saying? Enough is enough. Enough of killings, enough of kidnappings, enough of abductions, enough of insurgency, enough of reckless killings.
We must go to the root of the problems and collectively find solutions and hold all those public office holders accountable. The Inspector General of Police must be accountable. The Chief of Army Staff must be accountable. The Chief of Naval Staff must be accountable. The Chief of Air Staff must be accountable. The essence of their being in office is to provide security.
Since the beginning of this year, Nigeria's northwest and north central have been hit by a renewed wave of armed banditry and kidnapping for ransom. Over 200 persons have been killed in attacks by bandits and cattle rustlers, and many more have been kidnapped for ransom. On Tuesday, the president met with the country's security chiefs, ordering them to do everything to end the killings and the kidnappings.
Briefings were to the effect that we've had better response from the military and security agencies in those areas that were earlier mentioned. This is particularly because of the improved synergy amongst the various agencies that are providing information and intelligence.
While the security agencies have no doubt made some progress in reining in the bandits, the attacks have by no means stopped, something this group wants to happen.
The other one, which is the most important aspect of security, employment for young people, men and women, young men and women who are leaving the universities and high schools in their millions. This government must provide employment for them.
As President Buhari begins his second term of office, he's sure going to come under further pressure to deal with the security challenges in the country. How quickly he changes strategy and reverses the situation, especially in the northwest and north central, the better it will be for everyone in this country. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Sudan opposition leaders declare their 2-day nationwide strike is 90% successful, but talks remain deadlocked. And students in Somalia resit national exams after invalidation due to cheating.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. AfricaLive. Find your voice. AfricaLive. Find your voice.
On to Somalia, and a nationwide examination is being held just days after massive protests broke out following a move by the government to invalidate the national exams. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo reports now from Mogadishu on enhanced security measures to curb cheating.
Authorities in Somalia have commenced national secondary exams just days after it was postponed. Earlier this month, it emerged that exam papers were being sold and shared on social media, prompting Mogadishu to cancel the examinations. The exercise is being conducted in more than 100 learning centers in south and central regions of the country. At least 30,000 students are sitting for the final exams. The government is not taking any chances and has enacted tough measures to avoid cheating. Over 31,000 students were affected by the cancellation of the national examination after it emerged that papers were being distributed through various social media platforms, prompting the Somali government to enact tough security measures in a bid to protect the integrity of the exams.
One of the measures we have enforced is placing senior police officers in guarding the national examinations. We have also changed some questions in the test. Every region will sit for a different examination, but the test will be the same from the Ministry of Education.
Security was tight in all examination centers across the country as students sat for the final papers. Earlier this month, hundreds of high school students marched in protest against the decision by the government to invalidate exams after they were leaked on various social media platforms.
I am doing my exams at this school today. Earlier this month, I sat for 6 papers, but due to recent events, I am contented with the decision by the government for us to resist the whole exam.
I welcome the government's move for students to redo their national examinations. We want a fair process whereby students receive good grades based on hard work. We want proper and genuine academic documents and results for our university application.
Social media was, however, spared despite an earlier directive by the ministry to shut it down. However, the Education Minister warned that it will be forced to take such drastic measures in the future so as to protect the quality of education in Somalia and the future of the next generation. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Libya has handed over Hesham Ashmawi to Egypt. He's said to be a highly dangerous terrorist and leader of militant groups such as Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. He was arrested last October in eastern Libya. Yasser Hakim looks at the history of Hesham Ashmawi and the significance of this arrest.
He's the most wanted man in Egypt. After being dismissed from the army in 2011, the former Special Forces officer became a leader of the terrorist groups Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis and Daesh in Sinai. The groups are responsible for scores of killings and bombings in Egypt since 2012. The assassination of the public prosecutor in 2013. The failed assassination attempt on Minister of Interior in 2013. The bombing of the police headquarters in western Egypt in December 2013 and 14 people were killed. An attack on Al Farafra military checkpoint in July 2014 and 28 soldiers were killed. An attack on a bus carrying Coptic worshippers in Upper Egypt in May 2017, killing 29 people. And an attack on police convoy in Oasis Desert in October 2017, killing 16 policemen.
He established several extremist organizations in Libyan territories and coordinated with Al-Qaeda leaders in the region. He also trained many militants in El Salvador area in southern Libya. This area was the springboard from where extremists were sent to launch their attacks in Libya, Egypt, and the rest of North Africa. His arrest is a big blow to the extremist groups in the region.
Ashmawi has been based in Derna, eastern Libya, where he pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda in Maghreb in 2015. Experts say his arrest is significant for the fight on terrorism.
It has extreme strategic importance for the security officials. Hesham el-Ashmawi possesses a wealth of information about the movement of militants in the area and the sleeper cells in northern Sinai and borders with Libya. Ashmawi is the black box of Al-Qaeda in North Africa, and extracting information from him would help in the crackdown and dismantling of these terrorist organizations.
The extremely dangerous man was arrested in an ambush by the Libyan army in Derna, and he was prevented from detonating his explosives belt when he was captured. Extradited to Cairo, Hisham Ashmawi will face trial for the terrorist attacks he masterminded in Egypt in the last 6 years. And if convicted, he is expected to receive the death penalty. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now head to Sudan, where hundreds of workers at Sudanese banks and government offices went on strike for a second day on Wednesday, demanding the country's ruling generals step down. The two-day strike was aimed to pile pressure on the military council to hand over power to civilian rule. The strike follows last week's suspension of talks between the opposition and the military council. The negotiations hit a deadlock on the leadership of the planned transitional body. The foreign minister of the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation held a meeting in Saudi Arabia in preparations for the summit scheduled to take place in Makkah on the 31st of May. The leaders discussed regional conflict, with the Palestinian crisis topping the agenda. Ministers emphasized that Islamic countries will not accept any solution that does not give Palestinians an independent sovereign state, with East Jerusalem as its capital. The attacks against vessels near to the UAE and Saudi pipelines, along with the crisis in Libya, Syria and Yemen, were also discussed. The Arab League nations are also concerned about Iran.
3 summits will take place this week here in Mecca. Heads of states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, League of Arab States and Organization of Islamic Conference have all been invited. Even Saudi Arabia's foes, among them Qatar, have been asked to join, as the kingdom wants to get support against Iran.
The main purpose is to reach collective measures to stop Iranian movements in the region and to limit the power of militias supported by Iran in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia sees a big threat over Iran's expanding influence beyond its territories. For Saudi, that's alarming. It will affect the battle between Sunnis and Shiites and displaying power over the region.
Frequent Saudi reports of Iranian missiles used by Houthis to attack it has increased tension between the two. The latest were recent attempts against Saudi oil fields and vessels near UAE's Fujairah port. Earlier this month, the US has deployed an aircraft carrier and bomber task force in the Middle East, citing Iranian threats.
If there is a true will amongst the Islamic nations to reduce Iran's influence, I'd expect the summit to support the US sanctions against Iran and countries that support it. The US has increased its troops in the region, pushing more missile launchers and an aircraft carrier. But it's still not enough for an indication of a possible attack or a real threat.
Iranian foreign minister has warned members of the OIC from taking measures against Tehran. He stressed the Organization of Islamic Conference shouldn't be used as a tool by Saudi Arabia to pressure other member states.
The Organization of Islamic Conference has 56 members, making it the second largest organization after the UN. Saudi Arabia wants to get a unanimous support for it against Iran, which is a member. So this meeting could also expose the differences within. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Mecca, Saudi Arabia.
Well, Adel is in Mecca keeping tabs on the summits, as we can see there. Adel, Libya and Sudan were on the agenda. What more can you tell us?
Well, the Organization of Islamic Summit have been trying to help in some regional conflicts as well. In Libya, there has been a move by the foreign ministers to put on a resolution urging for a ceasefire and calling all parties to resort to conversation and political dialogue. It comes after, of course, the escalation from the eastern forces led by Khalifa Haftar against the Tripoli capital of Libya, trying to take over and marginalize the government of national accord. In general, the move comes at a time that there has been accusations among some members of the OIC to give support to some of the two battling parties in Libya rather than the other. When it came to Sudan, actually the Marshal Abdel Fattah Burhan, the head of the Sudanese Military Transitional Council, has arrived to Saudi Arabia. He is representing his country in this summit that will start taking place today and tomorrow. The emergency summits are scheduled for today. Abdel Fattah Burhan appears in a civilian uniform for the very first time, an indication of his political presence and representation of Sudan itself. There has been a move also among foreign ministers, especially Arab foreign ministers in Saudi Arabia, to give recognition to the military council in Sudan as a sort of the legitimate body that governs Sudan and helps support Sudan's political process.
And Adel, how much is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation involved in African conflicts?
The OIC has 56 members. About half of them are African countries. So there is much of a concern about the well-beings of these nations. About 26, 27 countries are African origins and are African states as well. So the whole point for the organization is to help get cooperation from the rest of the Islamic world to all its member states, including, of course, African countries. So for these nations, there has been a lot of discussions about their domestic affairs and political situations. There are many instability regions in the continent, and they have been working on, including, to just give an example, for example, Somalia, Sierra Leone are concerns beside, of course, the North African countries. There are concerns as well that stretches in Central Africa and the Saharan region. So countries from Nigeria to Mauritania and Somalia, all this strap are almost all of them belong to the OIC, and therefore the threat of terrorism and economic development comes as crucial issues for the OIC to work on and help get external support from non-African countries to Africa.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Adel El Marouhi there in Mecca following the summits taking place there. We are going to a short break now. We've got all the business news coming up, including Chinese telecom giant Huawei to continue to invest in 5G development program despite trade blacklist. And bank workers in Sudan join protests calling for the installation of a civilian government.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
Well, let's start the business segment with a look at the ongoing saga between Huawei and the US government. The Chinese telecom giant says that it will continue to invest in the 5G development program despite the trade blacklist. Well, according to the firm's spokesman, its inclusion on the United States so-called entity list is unwarranted.
Huawei's leading in 5G from a technology perspective. We've invested very heavily. We know from independent testing that our 5G is better than that of our competitors. We think the entity listing is unwarranted. We think it should be reversed. We think that the global supply chain, there are many companies, there are thousands and thousands of people all over the world, many of whom do not carry an American passport, who are now being affected by a law enacted by the US government. Is that fair? Is it reasonable? We believe it's not.
Well, Huawei maintained its ranking as the world's #2 smartphone vendor in the first quarter this year. That's according to a fresh report from market research firm Gartner. The Chinese tech giant sold about 58.4 million units of smartphones in the quarter, up by 44.5%. According to Gartner, Huawei recorded the highest year-on-year growth among the world's top 5. Huawei's global market share also witnessed an increase from 10.5% to 15.7% over the same period. The company did particularly well in 2 of its biggest markets, Europe and Greater China. But the impact of the US action against the firm is set to spook buyers. Elsewhere, CGTN anchor Liu Xin joined America's Fox Business Network host Trish Regan on her primetime show for an unprecedented live discussion on the current ongoing trade dispute between the world's two top economies.
Very pleased tonight.
17 minutes, 6 questions, ranging from trade to Huawei and to China's economy. But with Trish Regan asking and Liu Xin answering, it turned out to be more of a Chinese anchor clearing up her American counterpart's confusion. Regan starts by asking about Liu's overall trade assessment.
Unless the United States government treat the Chinese negotiating team with respect and show the willingness to talk without using outside pressure, there is high possibility that there could be a productive trade deal.
Regan puts herself on the same page, saying, I want to believe something can be done, and then goes on to intellectual property rights.
How do American businesses operate in China if they're at risk for having their property, their ideas, their hard work stolen?
I think there's a consensus because without the protection of IP right, nobody, no country, no individual can be stronger, can develop itself. There are companies in the United States who sue each other all the time over infringement on IP rights. And you can't say simply because these cases are happening that America is stealing.
Taking up tariffs, Regan compares China's rates with that of the US and says, let's get rid of them altogether. Liu welcomes the idea but stresses it isn't just about China and the US.
If you don't like the rules, we'll change the rules. But again, it has to be a multinational, a multilateral decision
I
process.
would just say,
They move on to the latest concerns on Huawei and China's economic status and end with Regan stating her hope for win-win solutions.
No one wants a trade war. But we have to think long and hard about the right next steps.
Well, the Trump administration has been using intellectual property losses to justify its trade battle with China. The White House accuses China of stealing IPR and forcing US companies to transfer technologies to Chinese companies. So, is there any concrete evidence supporting those allegations?
The allegations were mainly based on a 2017 report from the U.S. Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property. The report estimated that IP theft cost American individuals and businesses between $225 to $600 billion annually. The Commission said that most of the loss was caused by the theft of Americans' trade secrets, followed by software piracy and counterfeiting. How much is China responsible for the stolen billions? There's no clear answer.
We don't see any official algorithm or detailed calculation. In fact, the U.S. trade deficit with China has nothing to do with intellectual property, but the U.S. uses IPR protection as an excuse to escalate trade frictions anyway.
Calculations aside, from a business perspective, technology and talent transfers between China and the U.S. are now based on contracts. U.S. companies have been doing businesses and setting up research and development institutes in China since the 1990s. Those companies include Microsoft, Qualcomm, General Electric, and Intel. They came voluntarily to profit from vast Chinese market, and China let them in because it's shifting toward a market economy that respects competition.
The investments, joint ventures, trade, everything is consensual because American companies can always benefit from China. In the past, we attracted them with a low-cost business environment, and now we have a massive market and strong buying power.
The country is improving the IPR protection system at the same time. China last year paid almost $36 billion for overseas intellectual properties. That's 20 times the amount paid when China first joined the WTO in 2001. China also released a national IPR strategy in 2008 to spur innovation. The legislation body also set up a special intellectual property court earlier this year to deal with lawsuits. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN.
Hundreds of workers at Sudan's banks and government offices, including the key oil ministry, went on strike for a second day on Wednesday to demand the country's ruling generals step down. The two-day strike aimed to pressure the military council that took power after ousting longtime President Omar al-Bashir in April to hand over to civilian rule. The Alliance for Freedom and Change protest movement called the strike after the suspension of talks over the shape of a transitional authority. Well, thousands of employees of government offices, banks, private sector firms and the docks of Port Sudan observed the strike, saying only civilian rule can lift Sudan out of its political crisis.
We are participating in the strike to achieve our goal of establishing a civil state so that the blood of the martyrs who died for this country will not go to waste. We want it to be a civilian state, and the people are calling for this. Yet the military council is still procrastinating and does not want to hand power over to a civilian authority. If civil disobedience is called, we will participate in it.
The strike is 100% successful, but the current government has been a military one for more than 30 years. Even those appointed during the 30 years are afflicted by the National Congress Party. Therefore, they say that the strike is not successful.
The economic sector is the most important sector and the most negatively affected due to the bad economic policies, practices based on political loyalty, and whether someone belongs to the National Congress Party or not.
The UK's Trade Minister Liam Fox has visited Egypt for talks aimed at promoting trade and investment between the two countries. CGTN's Yasser Hakim filed this report.
The UK is one of the major investors in Egypt, especially in oil and gas and tourism sectors. But during Liam Fox's visit, the cooperation has extended to other fields. One mega project signed this week is in transportation.
The UK won a tender to construct a €3 billion monorail project that includes construction, operating and maintenance, in addition to producing the train carriages locally. The monorail is important as it will link Greater Cairo from the west to the east. It will transport people between Cairo all the way to the new capital.
Deals were also signed in digitizing the public health services. The meeting comes as the UK is bracing for an exit from the European Union.
The UK is searching for its old trading partners, especially after the fallout with the EU over Brexit. England is securing alternative markets in case of a drop in trade after Brexit. But the UK has always been an important trading partner with Egypt, and Egypt is a significant market of over 100 million consumers.
In a statement in Cairo, Fox said the UK aims to be the largest investor in Africa from the G7 countries by the year 2022. This is the first visit by Liam Fox to Egypt since he became International Trade Secretary in 2016. The Cairo stop is part of a regional tour to North African countries aimed at tapping investment and trade opportunities in the continent. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
We're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Tunisian artist uses display to raise awareness on environment and refugees.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Libya has faced chronic electricity shortages since 2011, with ration supply and cuts averaging more than 10 hours a day during the summer season when air conditioning is indispensable. Power outages may worsen, exacerbated by the damage caused by fighting between the Libyan National Army and army groups loyal to the Tripoli-based unity government.
2011. The year a NATO-backed uprising toppled long-time leader Muammar Mohammed Gaddafi, plunging Libya into years of bloody chaos.
Honestly, the damage is substantial. Though we were able to limit the damage on many sites during the first period, but we have daily reports issued by the maintenance departments present at the sites of the clashes.
Even before military strongman Khalifa Haftar of the Libyan National Army began his offensive, GECOL estimated that fighting and looting since 2011 had caused more than $1 billion worth of damage to its network.
We are talking about the southern line of the Al-Hadaba area, which got damaged. This line is, of course, very important to the public network.
The latest round of fighting has also forced 2 European companies from Italy and Austria to halt their operations and evacuate their staff from a power station west of Tripoli. Other firms from South Korea, Turkey and Germany had to suspend their projects to build new power stations. The reluctance of foreign firms to return to the volatile country means it relies on its neighbors Algeria and Tunisia to keep lights on. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Mohsen is a resident of Zarzis in Tunisia. He used to lead an ordinary life until he was inspired to do something more meaningful. Having grown up by the sea, Mohsen has been collecting objects that he found on the beaches for 23 years now. He puts items like bottles, buoys and dolphin bones on display at his own small museum. With his artistic arrangements, Mohsen hopes to create awareness about the environment and the refugee crisis. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi has more.
Memory of the Sea is the name of this museum located in the coastal city of Zarzis, southeastern Tunisia. For the past 23 years, Mohsen has been collecting bottles and all kinds of objects he found on the beaches. The retired post office employee, self-taught artist, was making his own art installations to raise awareness about marine pollution and the environment.
In 1993, I was in my 40s. I said enough to observing, reading, smoking and politics. I dedicated my life to my childhood dream, which is the sea. Chance and wave movements were my guide in collecting objects at dawn or during the sunset.
Guinness World Records recognized Mohsen for collecting 26,820 items in just 6 years. Residents of Zarzis say they are proud of their artist.
Mohsen is a self-made man and artist. The city of Zarzis is proud of him because his achievement has been recognized by the prestigious Guinness Book. Nobody thought of collecting bottles and objects like he did.
Mohsen has often found unnamed and unclaimed bodies of African migrants on the beach.
I found over 1 million objects, but I chose to keep a small portion. This bottle gave me the power to continue. The message in the bottle was written by a migrant who's written back to his family. I'm living an adventure and feeling the suffering of African migrants.
Mohsen calls on Tunisian, African and European visitors of his museum to listen to the untold stories of African migrants. The stories are often revealed by each object he collects on the beach. The artist of Zarzis is encouraging fellow Tunisian citizens and people in Mediterranean countries to contribute to waste management, which is a tool for environmental protection. Mohsen also urges governments and NGOs to look at the refugee crisis issue from a humanitarian perspective. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
We have all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including